We wanted a threesome to check off our bucket list. Now she's pregnant, he's gone, and my life's in ruins. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had my life perfectly mapped out. I was engaged to Daniel, 32M, my partner of 5 years. Daniel was everything I thought I wanted: reliable, sweet, and supportive. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue and hit it off immediately. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was consistent, the kind of guy who always made me feel safe. We had been planning our dream wedding for nearly a year. Everything was on track: the venue, the guest list, the dress, every detail had been painstakingly chosen. We were excited to settle down and start a family shortly after. We even talked about how to make our marriage feel special long after the wedding day, keeping the spark alive. And then there was Jenna. She's 30, effortlessly beautiful, and one of those people who draws attention wherever she goes. Jenna and I became friends through work, and she quickly became part of our social circle. She's the kind of friend who's always up for anything: drinks, spontaneous road trips, you name it. I used to love that about her. A few months before the wedding, Daniel and I started joking about doing something wild before we tied the knot. At first, the ideas were innocent: scuba diving, traveling, or even a last-minute Vegas trip. Then one night, after a bit too much wine, the conversation took a turn. Daniel casually mentioned Jenna. What if we did something with her? You know, just once, for fun. He laughed, like it was a joke. But there was a look in his eyes that made me realize he was serious. I didn't shut it down immediately. That's on me. Part of me was curious, part of me wanted to prove how cool and adventurous I could be. After all, Jenna was attractive, and I trusted Daniel completely. If anything, I thought this would bring us closer together, something we'd look back on and laugh about in 10 years. It started as an idea that felt too wild to ever actually happen. Daniel and I had spent weeks joking about how boring we were for settling down so smoothly. We had no dramatic relationship drama stories, no big regrets to hash out. Our relationship had always been steady, grounded. So when Daniel floated the idea of doing something crazy before the wedding, just to shake things up, I was intrigued. Jenna came up naturally in those conversations. She was the kind of woman who seemed born for adventure, bold, uninhibited, and always at ease with herself. I used to envy her confidence. She wasn't just my friend but someone who'd slipped into both our lives effortlessly. She'd been over for dinners, joined us on hikes, and even helped me with wedding DIY projects. Jenna felt like a safe choice, a shared friend we both trusted. The plan snowballed one evening over drinks. Jenna was over at our place, as she often was, lounging on the couch with a glass of wine in hand, recounting one of her outrageous travel stories. She had this way of making anything sound thrilling, even reckless decisions. I don't even remember who first brought it up, Daniel or me, but by the time the idea was out in the open, Jenna didn't flinch. She just laughed and said, "You two are adorable. If you're serious, let me know." It felt like a challenge. Something we'd never normally do, but why not? I told myself it was one night, a small, secret adventure that would make our bond even stronger. Jenna's casual confidence eased my nerves, and Daniel was surprisingly gentle and reassuring about the whole thing. "This will be good for us," he'd said, with that steady smile of his. When the night came, I remember feeling equal parts nervous and excited. We booked a hotel room, dressed up, and treated it like a special date. It felt surreal, stepping out of our usual roles. The atmosphere was playful, exciting, and yes, intimate. I won't go into explicit details, but I'll admit, it was thrilling in a way I hadn't expected. The next morning, lying next to Daniel, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt closer to him than ever, like we'd just shared something deeply personal and raw. But there was also a tiny knot in my stomach, a small voice I tried to ignore. It whispered questions I didn't want to face. Was this really a good idea? Did we just open a door we might regret? Daniel seemed completely at ease, laughing as we recapped the night on the way home. Jenna texted me later that day, a light-hearted message about how fun it had been and how she adored us both. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, just a one-time thing, something we'd tuck away as a wild memory. For a while, it felt like it was. But then the text started. And Jenna started showing up more. Little things I wouldn't have noticed before suddenly felt glaringly obvious. A touch on Daniel's arm that lingered a second too long. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. I told myself I was overthinking it, that we were all just close friends. At first, I told myself it was all in my head. Jenna had always been a big part of our lives, so what if she texted Daniel about something funny or stopped by unexpectedly? She'd done that before. I convinced myself that her increased presence wasn't new, I was just hyper-aware because of what we'd shared. But the signs became harder to ignore. The texts weren't just casual, they were late at night, sometimes just emojis that Daniel would chuckle at and hide his phone. Their inside jokes, once innocent, now felt like I was the punchline. If I walked into a room, their laughter would die down, and Daniel would look almost guilty. When I'd bring up wedding details, like the cake or seating chart, Daniel would change the subject or offer a half-hearted "whatever you want, babe." One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. Jenna had texted Daniel something that made him grin, and I snapped. "What's so funny that you can't share with me?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Daniel froze, mumbling something about Jenna's quirky humor, while Jenna, sitting across from us with a glass of wine, just smirked. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. Jenna had texted Daniel something that made him grin, and I snapped. "What's so funny that you can't share with me?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Daniel froze, mumbling something about Jenna's quirky humor, while Jenna, sitting across from us with a glass of wine, just smirked. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "Don't tell me you're jealous. We're just friends." It was infuriating. She wasn't outright disrespectful, but her tone, her body language, it was as if she enjoyed watching me squirm. I tried to confront her later, pulling her aside when Daniel was out of earshot. "Jenna, this is starting to feel off," I said carefully. Her eyes widened in mock surprise. "Off? You're overthinking this, babe. I adore you both. You're getting married to Daniel, not me." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the knot in my stomach only grew. Then Daniel began to pull away. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things, like not holding my hand as often or being distracted when we talked. But it escalated quickly. He started coming home late, claiming work was stressful. He avoided conversations about the future, brushing off any mention of the honeymoon or the family we'd planned to start. I started to feel like a stranger in my own relationship. Everything came to a head one night at a casual dinner with friends. Jenna had invited us over, along with a few others, for drinks and takeout. I was already on edge, feeling like a third wheel in my own relationship, but I tried to push the tension aside. That's when Jenna dropped the bombshell. As we all laughed over a silly anecdote, she leaned back in her chair, placed a hand on her stomach, and said, "Well, I've got some news. I'm pregnant." The table erupted in cheers and congratulations, until she added, with a sly glance at Daniel, "And it's his." The room fell silent. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. My head snapped toward Daniel, hoping, praying he would deny it. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at the table, his face pale. The sound of Jenna's voice, sweet and self-assured, cut through the ringing in my ears. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, Daniel packed his things and moved out. He didn't even have the decency to face me properly. Instead, he left a note on the counter. A note. It was some weak excuse about how he didn't mean for things to happen this way and how he wanted to do the right thing for Jenna and the baby. Do the right thing. I laughed bitterly when I read those words, the kind of laugh that comes from pure disbelief. What about doing the right thing for me? For the life we'd built together? For the future he'd promised me? But none of that mattered now. The wedding was cancelled, the deposits lost, and I was left to make humiliating phone calls to explain why it wasn't happening. My parents were devastated. My friends were furious. But no amount of sympathy or outrage could undo what had happened. I spent days curled up on the couch, surrounded by wedding invitations that would never be mailed, alternating between sobbing and staring at the walls. But time has a way of forcing you forward, even when you don't want to move. I dragged myself back to work, reconnected with friends, and started seeing a therapist to make sense of everything. And slowly, painfully, the fog began to lift. It was during this time that I started hearing whispers, little cracks in the perfect picture Jenna and Daniel were trying to paint. At first, it was subtle, mutual friends mentioning how Daniel seemed stressed or Jenna acting off during their gatherings. But the real cracks came when I ran into an old coworker of Jenna's at the grocery store. She casually mentioned Jenna's reputation, her history of impulsive decisions, and dramatic relationships. "She's not exactly the settled-down type," she said, almost apologetically, as if she realized too late what she'd implied. That conversation stuck with me, and I started piecing things together. Jenna's pregnancy had been conveniently timed. Too convenient. And while Daniel had cut me off entirely, I heard enough through mutual acquaintances to know that their happily ever after wasn't going as planned. Daniel was struggling, emotionally and financially. Jenna, once the fun-loving, carefree spirit, was showing her true colors. She wasn't interested in quiet domestic life or putting someone else's needs first. She was still out partying, leaving Daniel to pick up the slack. Their arguments had become public knowledge, with friends awkwardly choosing sides or avoiding them altogether. It didn't take long for the rumors to reach me. Mutual friends, some genuinely concerned, others just eager to share the drama, started hinting that Jenna hadn't exactly been exclusive around the time she got pregnant. There were at least 2 other men she'd been seeing on the side. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Daniel. Almost. Even as the cracks in their relationship became impossible to ignore, Jenna still had him wrapped around her finger. She spun some story about how these rumors were just jealous gossip, people trying to ruin their happiness. And Daniel, ever the fool, chose to believe her. He doubled down, cutting off anyone who questioned him and publicly declaring that he was committed to his family. I wanted to reach out, to tell him to wake up and see the truth, but what was the point? He'd made his choice when he walked out of our apartment and left me to pick up the pieces. Still, a part of me wanted closure, a definitive end to this nightmare. Months went by, and the rumors surrounding Jenna only grew louder. Friends who'd initially congratulated me on handling everything so gracefully now reached out with tidbits of information I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Apparently, Jenna had been seeing more than one man during the time she got pregnant. There were whispers about a coworker, some guy from her gym, and even a fling she'd reconnected with from her past. At first, I dismissed it as gossip, but the details were too specific to ignore. Her coworker was already married, the gym guy had moved out of state, and the fling had reportedly blocked her after she showed up drunk outside his apartment. Through it all, Daniel stood by her. If he heard the rumors, and he must have, he never let on. I guess he was too deep in the mess to admit what was painfully obvious to everyone else: Jenna was no saint, and the life she'd promised him was a fantasy. But cracks were showing, even without the rumors. Jenna was still the same free-spirited party girl she'd always been, and the novelty of playing house seemed to wear off quickly. She started going out more, leaving Daniel at home to deal with the pregnancy preparations and, later, the baby itself. "She's at the club almost every weekend," one friend told me, barely able to contain their schadenfreude. And guess who's at home? Daniel. He's turning into a full-time babysitter while she's out living her best life. Another friend mentioned seeing Jenna at a bar a few nights before. She wasn't exactly acting like someone in a committed relationship, they said carefully, though the implication was clear. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions hearing all this. Part of me was furious that Daniel, the man who'd abandoned me for this so-called future, was still clinging to Jenna, despite everything. Another part of me was almost satisfied. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because it proved that their betrayal wasn't the perfect love story they'd probably imagined. I later found out that Daniel was trying to hold everything together on his own. He was overwhelmed, exhausted, and miserable, according to one of our mutual friends. Jenna, in the meantime, was treating him like a live-in nanny and focusing on herself. When people asked her about Daniel, she'd wave them off with comments like, "He's fine. He loves taking care of the baby. It's cute, really." The irony of it all was almost too much. This was the woman he'd chosen over me, the one he'd thrown everything away for, and she couldn't even be bothered to stick around long enough to pretend she cared. Despite all of this, Daniel stayed. Maybe he thought he could fix it, or maybe he was just too proud to admit he'd made a mistake. Whatever the reason, he refused to see the truth, even as Jenna's actions made it clearer every day. I won't lie, knowing how things were unraveling brought me a sense of closure. It didn't erase the pain or the humiliation, but it did remind me of one simple fact: I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the one who lied, cheated, or abandoned someone I loved. As for Jenna and Daniel, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Their foundation was built on betrayal, and no amount of denial could hold it together forever. As for me, I've learned to let go of the anger and focus on myself. Therapy helped me unpack the mess they left behind, and now, I'm rediscovering who I am outside of that relationship. I've picked up hobbies I abandoned during my time with Daniel, reconnected with old friends, and even started traveling solo, a dream I'd shelved for too long. Looking back, I'm grateful in a strange way. Their betrayal forced me to reevaluate what I want and deserve in a partner. One day, I'll meet someone who values honesty and respect, someone who knows that love isn't about games or lies. For now, I'm content building a life I'm proud of, with or without a partner. What do you think? Did I dodge a bullet, or should I have fought harder to expose their lies? Has anyone else dealt with a situation like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and let me know. Because so many asked about an update, here it is. It's been a year since Daniel and Jenna turned my life upside down, and it seems their perfect little family has finally crumbled. I found out through mutual friends that their relationship started falling apart shortly after the baby was born. Jenna, true to form, never stopped craving attention and excitement. While Daniel was busy changing diapers and trying to balance his job with sleepless nights, Jenna was back to her old ways. She started going out again, staying out late, and leaving Daniel to handle everything. At first, Daniel tried to keep up appearances, but cracks quickly became impossible to ignore. Friends told me that Jenna wasn't even subtle about it, flirting openly at bars, disappearing for hours, and dismissing Daniel as boring when people asked about him. And then came the bombshell: the baby isn't his. Apparently, Jenna's flings from the same time frame resurfaced, and one of them, the real father, stepped forward to claim paternity. A DNA test confirmed it, and Daniel was devastated. I'm told he's been couchsurfing since Jenna kicked him out of the apartment they were renting together. She's now moved in with the actual father, leaving Daniel with nothing. I wish I could say I felt bad for him, but I don't. This is the life he chose when he left me for Jenna and her lies. To see everything unravel so spectacularly almost feels like poetic justice. As for me, I'm still doing well. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and I've worked hard to create something I'm proud of. Daniel did try to reach out recently. He called a mutual friend to get a message to me, but I blocked him immediately. There's nothing he could say that would undo the damage he caused or make me want him back in my life. So because something's happened in the past months, I wanted to keep you updated, because it helped me making progress with this whole mess. It's been almost 18 months since my world fell apart, but life has a funny way of working out in the end. After everything with Daniel and Jenna, I never thought I'd be able to trust someone again. But I'm happy to say that's changed. I've met someone new. His name is Michael, and he's thoughtful, kind, and everything Daniel wasn't. Michael runs a prominent social and family-oriented company, where integrity isn't just a buzzword but a core value. I had no idea about the connection at first. We met through mutual friends at a charity event I started volunteering with, and it was weeks before we even talked about our pasts. When I eventually opened up about what Daniel and Jenna had done, Michael's face changed. "Daniel who?" he asked, and when I said the name, his expression said it all. Michael told me he'd been aware of Daniel's struggles at work. After leaving me, Daniel's performance had plummeted, and he'd become increasingly distracted and unreliable. But what really sealed the deal was when Michael learned the full story about Daniel's betrayal. "He represents this company's values," Michael said, shaking his head. "Or at least, he's supposed to. I can't have someone like that on my team." A week later, Daniel was let go. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like justice. Daniel had chosen to destroy my life for Jenna's fantasy, and now it was his turn to face the consequences. Fast forward to last week. Daniel somehow found out about me and my new boyfriend, and suddenly, he wanted to meet. He reached out through mutual friends, again, saying he needed to clear the air. At first, I wasn't going to go, but then I realized I didn't need closure. I had moved on. What I wanted was to finally let him see exactly how far I'd come without him. So, I agreed. We met at a cafe downtown. When I walked in, Daniel looked terrible. He was pale, disheveled, and fidgeting with his phone. The moment he saw me, he stood up and started rambling about how sorry he was, how Jenna had ruined his life, how he missed what we had. He even admitted he'd been a fool for believing Jenna's lies and begged me to give him another chance. I let him talk. Then, as calmly as I could, I said, "That's not going to happen." Before he could respond, Michael walked in. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and sat down beside me, completely unbothered by Daniel's stunned expression. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. Michael extended a hand. "Daniel." "Small world." Daniel mumbled something about bad timing, but Michael didn't seem to care. He turned to me and asked if I wanted my usual coffee. I said yes, and we started chatting like Daniel wasn't even there. Eventually, Daniel got up and left, muttering some excuse about being late. Watching him walk out of that cafe was the most satisfying moment I've had in years. I didn't need revenge, I didn't even want it. But knowing that Daniel had to face the life he built, while I was thriving in mine, was its own kind of justice. To everyone who followed my story, thank you for your support. It's been a long road, but I've learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's moving on, finding happiness, and letting karma handle the rest.
Hey, did you love this story? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more.